Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. And all week I've been talking about vampires. And while I've been talking about vampires, it has really struck me the wide variety of vampires that we have in fiction and in gaming. And that's not news to anybody. We have this incredibly wide range of vampires just in pop culture and in folktales in general. We've got everything from old kind of W.F. Murnau, Nosferatu, nasty looking guy who literally looks like a monster, all the way up to the more classy, attractive, sexy vampires. Whether that is something like Interview with a Vampire or Twilight or whatever it is, we have a lot of different takes on what a vampire is. Some vampires are tortured heroes who have to, who hate what they have to do to survive. And other vampires are just straight up monsters who are, gleeful about their need for blood, and they don't consider humans to be worth crying over. There's just so much room in there. One of my very favorite depictions of a vampire ever, actually, is a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. I think it was just last year. Netflix put out a 3-episode Dracula series that was written by the people that do Sherlock. And episode 3 didn't work for me. Episode 2 was good. Episode 1 was stellar. It was absolutely amazing. What they did is they started with, the novel Dracula itself. Person goes to Castle Dracula to work out a real estate deal for the old man who lives there, and then over time realizes, wait, there's something super wrong here. That first episode is one of the best, hands down, no question, one of the best depictions of gothic horror that I have ever seen put on film. The kinds of, the not only the time period, but the sensibility, the idea that there is this inescapable evil that the best you can hope to do is not defeat it, but run away from it. Just really good. And one of the characters, the whole story is kind of framed by a story in which, what's his bucket shows up, and I can't remember his name now, but the main character of Dracula, he shows up at a nunnery somewhere else in Romania, and he is trying to tell his story to some nuns there. And the main nun, who is not part of the Dracula myth, she's a new character created for this TV show, she is the best character. I absolutely friggin' loved her. I loved everything she said. The actress that did her, I believe, was Dutch, I want to say. And just a revelation. As a fan of horror, I cannot speak highly enough of the first episode of that Dracula. Maybe I'm overselling it and you're going to watch it and you're going to be like, well, this is good, but it wasn't as good as he said. I loved it. Absolutely, dearly loved everything about it. The second episode takes place during the time when Dracula is on the ship, because that's the other part of the Dracula myth, right? Is that he, or the original Dracula novel, he left home because he wanted to go to England. And this shows his, sea voyage as he is traveling from mainland Europe to England, and the rest of the people who are on the boat with him. I didn't love it as much as the first one, which I believe to be a transcendent example of gothic horror. But the second one was still great, and I really enjoyed it. The third one picks up like 100 years later in modern day England, and it didn't work as well for me. The ending in particular, the last scene, the last shot, really fell apart. I feel like they didn't know what they were doing. But anyway, this is not a review of the Dracula series on Netflix. I'm just pointing it out to you as a wonderful example of vampires in fiction that if you have not seen, please go watch it because it is dear to my heart. Let's say 1 3/4 of an episode of it are dear to my heart. Anyway, this week I've talked about the Rift's vampires, which are very action-oriented monsters you can kill, treated almost like zombies. They're an infectious plague, self-propagating monster, and you've got to deal with them in post-apocalyptic world. I've also talked about Vampire the Masquerade, which is very different. It is modern day secret world, secret history, highfalutin, high society vampires that are trying to manipulate the world from behind the scenes. Both of those fit perfectly inside of vampire pop culture, vampire fiction, and vampire gaming. And one of the things that makes vampires such a valuable creature, a valuable monster, a valuable storytelling tool is that you can tell all of those different kinds of stories with them, which is wonderful. The other thing that I have up here in my little graphic is Strahd. And it is difficult to talk about vampires in role-playing games without addressing Strahd at some point. He is one of the greatest villains that D&D has ever produced. I was talking to some friends yesterday about all the announcements they're making about the Dungeons and Dragons movie coming up. They have a killer cast for that movie. But what they don't have, or at least what they have not yet announced, is a story. And what my friend pointed out to me is that they do not have a solid story to fall back on. Dungeons and Dragons is a popular property because it allows you to tell your own stories within it. But there isn't really an ongoing meta-narrative to guide the entire thing. There are certainly a lot of important settings, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if this Dungeons and Dragons movie turned out to be set in Faerun and the Sword Coast. We end up visiting Neverwinter or Baldur's Gate or something like that. There are also these campaign stories, and I was running through my head and thinking to myself, well, do any of those stories have, any of the published D&D campaigns, are they the kind of thing you could build a movie on? Something like the Tomb of Horrors? No, absolutely not. That would not be interesting to a mainstream audience, and I suspect maybe not even to a geek audience. Watching a bunch of people go room by room and search for traps and then try to figure out what this thing is, there's just not a story there. There's stuff to do without any kind of a narrative. On the other hand, something like, the modern recreation of Tomb of Horrors, the modern answer to, I should say, the Tomb of Horrors is the Tomb of Annihilation, which has a much more solid story, but again, is very weird. When people think Dungeons and Dragons, they don't immediately think of going through a jungle full of dinosaurs and searching for a ruin. It's kind of like a Mesoamerican, African amalgam where the characters are kind of playing Indiana Jones-ish kind of characters. And again, that's not really what people are looking for with Dungeons and Dragons. And what I realized is that Strahd, Ravenloft, that world of Barovia, that setting and that story could 100% not only be a solid story that could, anchor a movie, but also has the cultural cachet that I think would attract a lot of people to it. That's not what they're going to do, because it should not be the first D&D movie. And I know there have been other D&D movies, but this is obviously a new thing, and they're hoping that they can start their own little, whether it's a cinematic universe or just a string of D&D brand adventure movies. Curse of Strahd will be one of them if they are successful. I can promise you that right now, but it won't be the first one. Just because they're going to want something that is much more typical, quest and dungeon and stuff like that. What makes Strahd so interesting for a game is that he is aware of the characters the whole time. And I don't know how much, players who are playing through the Curse of Strahd for the very first time might not realize that. But Strahd has spies everywhere. He knows what's going on. He knows who the people are and where they are, and so on and so on and so on. And the only reason that he doesn't just go out and take what he wants immediately is because he's got other schemes going on, because he is trying to test the characters. He is trying to amuse himself in a lot of ways. Strahd is unique in a lot of vampire stories and vampire games in that he's not, the masquerade Camarilla vampire who sits in the back and orchestrates things. He is not, these monsters from Rift's post-apocalyptic Earth who are just trying to take over everything. He is a lonely man who is trapped in a pocket dimension. He can't leave, and no one can leave, and so really what he does is he has kind of built this world for himself that, and he tries to entice outside adventurers to come in so that he can amuse himself a little bit and break up the tedium. And so, as a game master running the Curse of Strahd, finding ways to use Strahd as a character is super important but super tricky. Because if you don't bring him into the story, then he's... especially if you don't bring him into the story until the end, then he's incredibly disappointing. Because the characters play through everything, and they're like, well, we need to do this, and we're learning about Strahd, and everyone we talk to is terrified of him, and everywhere we go, people are worried about him, and his influence is everywhere. But by the time we actually meet him, we're strong enough to kill him, and he goes down like a chump. That's boring. That's not interesting. The way to make Strahd work is to bring him in frequently. Bring him in as early as you can. There are mixed opinions in the current edition whether or not to use the Death House adventure at all, and it certainly is kind of tonally mismatched to the rest of the campaign. Instead of being a giant sandbox where you can go anywhere and do anything, Death House is a very kind of rote dungeon that has some weird story elements in it that don't entirely fit with Barovia, and I've seen some really great YouTube videos about people who recommend that you actually start on the other side of Barovia, coming in through Krezk instead of in through the village and the Death House. I've seen some actually really detailed work of somebody who totally rebuilt the Death House. And, if you look up, Curse of Strahd Death House, you can find this pretty easily. Of someone, and I should link it in the notes, honestly, because it was really, really compelling, of someone who kind of really, using what's already there, using the maps, using the characters, just re-theming a couple bits of it and changing some of the history so that it actually does fit into the larger campaign much more effectively. Regardless of whether you use Death House or not, in my experience, my advice is to bring Strahd in right before or right after it. Let the characters come in, let them kind of experience Barovia, let them see the horrors that are here and the despair that marks pretty much every local, every person who lives in the entire valley. And then Strahd shows up. You're new here. What are you doing? Who are you? What are your intentions? You're going to be interesting to watch. If they mouth off to him, at this point, they're probably maybe level 3 at the most. And then you have a chance to, completely crush them with Strahd. And that sets him up as a hateful and a powerful antagonist. And then if he keeps returning Anytime they slip up with Irina and they expose her to danger, he can show up, or his servants can show up. Anytime that the characters bring down one of the powerful other monsters or creatures or villains in the setting, maybe it's someone that Strahd was relying on, or maybe it's someone that Strahd is glad to be rid of, he can show up and he can talk to them. Making sure to find opportunities to include Strahd as much as possible is what really makes the Strahd campaign, the Curse of Strahd, work. And the book tells you to do this, but I have seen too many game masters who don't know how to do that, or who ignore it, and they think, well, if Strahd shows up, he's just going to kill him. Well, yeah, early on he would. He would absolutely just kill them, except you got to remember, he's bored, and he wants not only the souls and the nourishment he can get from killing outsiders, but he wants people. He wants equals. He wants someone to challenge him, someone to fascinate him. And so he is strong enough that he doesn't need to crush them early on, and so he wouldn't. He is toying with them for a long time. Having him step in and mess with their plans, having him, not in an impish way. You don't want to make him, a figure of mockery or humor, but just stepping in right at a moment of triumph to snatch it away from them, or coming into something where they think they can defeat it, and then Strahd makes it harder on purpose to screw with them. All of these things give you a chance to build him up, not only as the image of a scary guy, but as a character in the story, someone that the players interact with, that they know, they have talked to him, they have the chance to, really gain some emotions about him, whether this is respect or more likely hatred, so that when that final battle finally does come, and they have the tools and they're able to track him down and kill him, it feels like the culmination of a character arc instead of just, hey, we did it. We found the boss at the end of the Mario castle, and we stomped him with our sun sword. So use those opportunities to bring him in. If the characters ever spend a night outside, which is not good, but because vampires can't enter a home, they should do their best to always enter a home of some kind every night. If they ever get stuck outside, they're basically asking for Strahd to show up at that point, to make their lives hell. Even if all he does is harry them with wolves, so that he doesn't necessarily kill them or attack them, but they don't get their long rest, and then they will learn, well, this sucks. We got to make sure we're inside. One of the hallmarks of being a dungeon master is just basically finding ways to mess with the players, right? You are not trying to... Your goal is not to kill them. Your goal is to tell a good story with them. Obviously, not that no one wants to kill the players, but the PCs themselves. You're trying to craft a good story that will be satisfying. Your goal is not to win. Your goal is to entertain and to tell a good story. And we find ourselves frequently having to, in the service of a good story, create conflict, create problems. And whether, every game master has their different method of doing this. They will fudge the dice, or they will, add a few extra bad guys to a random encounter or something like that. What Strahd gives you, and what the campaign is perfectly engineered to produce, is opportunities to use Strahd for all of that stuff. You need to add some extra bad guys to a random encounter? Well, Strahd is right there. He can go anywhere and do anything, and he's paying attention anyway, so why not have him step in and, be or cause that extra problem? Have him step in, and if you really don't want them to gain a certain object or a certain ally or a certain piece of information, Strahd can be your avatar in the story to take that away or to turn them a different direction or to prevent them from getting what you want. You can play him as deceitful. You can play him as a puppet master. You can play him as a bully. But however you do it, finding ways to bring him into the story are what really makes it work and what makes the campaign sing. So, there you go. Very basic advice about how to use Strahd, but I hope that it is valuable to you. Thanks for watching this video. My name is Dan Wells. I am a published author. I write a bunch of books, and you can find and read all of them online. Go check out Amazon. Go check out Audible, because I've got some big ones on there right now. There you go. I am also a professional game master, and if you want me to run a campaign or a one-shot for you, I can do that as well. Possibly even Strahd or Vampire the Masquerade or Rifts or anything else that we've been talking about or that you're interested in. So all of that information is also included in the notes underneath this video. Thank you for watching. My name is Dan Wells, and you are awesome.